everyone. As Shane mentioned, I run an organization called Music Export Memphis. The reason I'm moderating this panel is because all the work that we do really exists at the intersection of music, tourism, and economic development. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves. And I'd love for you, as you tell us about yourself and your role, just kind of imagining this triple Venn diagram: music, tourism, economic development. Where do you see yourself in that? You know, in the work that you're doing, you know, sort of more in one side or the other, and kind of talk about that a little bit. Start here.
Hi, afternoon. I'm Shawn Starwood. I'm the Assistant Director for the Arts for the City of Bloomington. I'm housed in the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development. So I'm kind of essentially the ombudsman for the arts and culture organizations in the City of Bloomington. So I work on the behalf of all kind of music venues. I manage a cultural district that's state designated called the Bloomington Entertainment and Arts District. And kind of come to the work as an artist, kind of being an agitator, you know, throwing stones in the office, I'm in the office that I used to throw stones at, I guess is the way to think about it. And so coming from the work of looking at kind of economic development in the arts, but also moving kind of beyond that argument a little bit, and I can kind of unpack that in the panel a little later, but so just looking at a variety of different strategies in which the city, and what I mean by that, I mean government supporting culture, and how we continue to maintain to do that.
Good afternoon, Chris Gall with VisitIndy. Thanks for sticking around. It's criminal that it's so nice outside and you're inside, but it speaks volumes to the importance of this topic. I represent VisitIndy. We're the official sales and marketing organization for the city. Our job is to drive tourism to market Indianapolis outside of Indianapolis. We're up to 28 million people from around the world who now visit. 11% of them are international. We're very proud about that. But we still fight a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions, including our music scene and what we have to offer, and is it just Johnny Cougar Mellencamp and Babyface? So got some stats on that I want to share, but happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know there are some familiar faces here, but I can't see anyone out there. I'm Linda Broadfoot. I'm the director of Indy Parks. Musically, I'm a former karaoke superstar and current head cheerleader for having as many concerts as possible at Indy Parks. So, you know, I think our role probably, you know, loosely touches a few different areas. I think, you know, in the right context, we can be a tourism builder if we're, you know, if we're having big enough shows where we're drawing people in, like the shows that MOKB puts on at Garfield Park. But also, I think, you know, we could skirt the line around sort of community and economic development as we're sort of creating places for people to gather, and maybe even doing some audience development if we're exposing folks who wouldn't be exposed to something by having free concerts in the park, that sort of thing. So thanks for having me.
Hi, my name is Joanna Finch. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University in Bloomington. And I'm an economist who studies cultural facility development as well as artist employment and artist labor markets. So really I come at this from primarily research, so trying to understand what the relationship is between economic development, music, tourism. And I've looked at things like, what do outdoor amphitheaters, when you build those, what do those do to the communities that surround them? So relevant to the question we had in the last panel. So I'm constantly trying to answer questions that we all have about this very topic. And then that being said, I try to engage in practice too. So through consulting with different organizations and honestly just going to shows and hanging out. That's what I do too, so.
All right, so we're talking a little bit backstage. I don't think that there's anyone in this room that needs to be convinced that music is a driver of economic development and a driver of tourism. So I wanted to get into the weeds a little bit more. And I want to start with the positives, maybe successes, and just kind of open up our conversation there around whether that's sort of figuring out how to communicate to the people at the top, decision makers, that this is something that needs to be looked at in a certain way, or literally a specific initiative or a specific program or a specific statistic that you're seeing in your work that you're able to draw back and connect to music. Just kind of want to open up to the panel to talk a little bit about where you've been successful or where you've seen successes in this space.
go down the
Yeah.
line. Okay,
Or
yeah.
however, jump in.
So I think the city of Bloomington's done a pretty interesting model, which is having a full-time city staffer that's reports to the mayor's office specifically for arts and culture, and then also having the state-designated kind of cultural district so that we can work both with the state, both on tourism issues and a variety of those kinds of things. So that position was formed in 2008, which is kind of crazy to think about, like in the middle of the recession, they announced this position. But that kind of shows the commitment and the dedication that Bloomington has to arts and culture and the vitality that that brings, not only from the perspective of economic impact, but actually quality of life. And I think that's the kind of conversation we should be having, is these people move places, jobs follow, not the reverse. And I think Bloomington has been really strong about that. Granted, our wages aren't growing super dramatically yet. We're working on that. But I think that's a really interesting kind of quality of place indicators that we need to be looking at. And Joanna might push back on me on that. But I think that's one of the kind of strategies that the city of Bloomington's been working on.
Well, just to piggyback off of that, so I'm from Bloomington now too, and one of the things that I think is successful about Bloomington is that we don't have a lot of money for infrastructure. So we're forced to focus on programming, and Shawn knows that first and foremost, that through his work, he has to sort of focus on bringing the artists to town, bringing the programming to town. And I've studied what the effects of building facilities is. Big, performing arts centers, big auditoriums, big venues, and by and large, that's usually a money sink. And where it really happens, where the communities really are better off, is when we put that money into programming and put that money into the music itself.
Positive, of those 28 million visitors, 21% are coming for entertainment. It's theater and live music. I think where we have so I think that's grown 4 or 5% in the last few years. But they're mainly coming for big name concerts, right? We're an affordable city. You check into a hotel, you go to a show, you eat out, and it's Cincinnati, Chicago, Louisville, Detroit. We're really prime on that space, so that's a positive. I think the room to grow is we're in the business of the perception of Indianapolis, and it's sports, sports, sports. We are just not seen as the grit of anything but major shows, and even the Lawn has done a good job. What Do 317 is doing here and elsewhere, but the perception just doesn't match the reality of the product. And I think another positive recently was the Lilly Endowment, one of the largest philanthropic foundations in the world, put out a call specifically about arts and culture here in Indianapolis to uplift it in the short term, 19 and 20. And how many people know of or were part of one of those proposals, right? That's a good thing. I think that's a huge stride. Now, how do we carry that momentum is another thing.
And Linda, it feels like you've got a very real example with all the music that you program in the park, of a success. And how much are you able to kind of track new visitors? Or do you feel like people are coming to your space that haven't really engaged before?
I would say, I can say we have, over 30,000 people attend concerts in Indy Parks every summer. I would say we could do a lot better, right? I've got a list here. You guys can't see it, but it's very tiny print of a gazillion concerts that we're having around the community. And I think, and I'm guessing, artists would say the same thing. We don't always get the showing that we're looking for. Now whether or not we're not promoting things in the right way, anything's possible. But sometimes I think we sort of take sort of the obvious stuff for granted in our community. We're having these tremendous artists who are coming out, on a Saturday night and a beautiful day like this in a beautiful location for free, or you can see them for free, and we don't often get the crowd we need. Now, the flip side is sometimes we'll have 4,000 to 5,000 people at a jazz concert on a Sunday night, and so it happens that way as well, but it's not always as consistent as I think it can be, for the number of people we have in the city who could appreciate these things.
I'm kind of, piggybacking on what both of you were just saying and moving slowly a little bit into the challenges category. One of the things that I think about a lot is how a strategy can really support this work in a way that drives attention to contemporary music and to new artists in a city or in a scene, because particularly in Memphis, and in many cities this is true, we just happen to be a really great example of a city whose music tourism offer is 100% legacy music, is what we call it. So people are coming to Graceland, they're coming to appreciate people who've been dead for a really long time. So, you know, and what we're learning now, luckily our CVB is tracking that people are coming for live music. This is one of the highest indicators. They're coming for live music, which is interesting because those people are, by virtue, alive. So very interested in that. But I definitely wanted us to dig into that a little bit. Just how, you know, it's easy to attract someone to go to a museum or to sort of appreciate those legacy pieces. How do we think about these issues in a way that draws in a tourist or, you know, brings funding and investment for our younger contemporary artists who are making music?
Yeah, so that's a really big challenge that Bloomington faces because we have a gap of 22 to 35-year-olds. So we are really good if you are 45 and you got a family, you want to move to Bloomington, it's the place to be. And we have some issues with traveling spouses with the university and maintaining those kinds of workforce individuals.
Traveling Spouses is my new band.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that we're looking at is, you know, that nostalgia factor is a really big problem, right? So like, there's the Bloomington of breaking away, and there's an entire generation that was like breaking away, you know, two hardware stores on the courthouse square. You know, this idea of Bloomington then, and then there's this idea of Bloomington now, which is a regional growing city. You know, if 69 ever gets complete, it will be great because I can get up here in a half hour, not an hour and a half. And then also looking at kind of just the growth patterns of the city and how it's evolved, and that it is a growing place where we have Secretly Group, which employs 50 people, which has a variety of other Russian recordings down there doing amazing work. We have a lot of bands. It's known to be one of those places where you can kind of move there, figure it out, and kind of be a part of the culture. But there is some pretty interesting power dynamics that we're going through, and there's a real struggle because our city council represents a particular population that is of a certain age. And so we're really trying to think about how do we do citizen-led participatory government. So we're looking at different ways in which younger individuals, through their phones or through various apps, through Google Forms, can kind of chime in on government decisions. And I think it also comes into where my position is more program-based rather than infrastructure support. So I don't manage a theater, I don't manage a park space, but rather I have ongoing consistent meetings with various arts and culture groups to make sure that those opinions and their considerations and criticisms of the city are heard at city council or to the mayor's office. Which is kind of just an interesting way of thinking about citizen-led participatory government.
I think a lot of it is really about investment and who's willing to invest into what. I mean, we all know that sort of some of the major funders are willing to invest in our legacy groups and our legacy organizations, but when it comes to new and emerging work, it's much harder to get someone like Lily to invest. And so it was great to see that RFP come out because that was something new and different. So I think the argument and the strategy is really to, you know, how do we talk to these potential investors who can help these communities, help emerging artists, help the contemporary music scene, and what do we argue to them? And so I think one of the strategies that's most effective is the accessibility argument, right? So there's a certain clientele that comes to an outdoor music performance of, you know, I don't know, Elvis. But there's also a certain group that comes to a new and emerging artist, and we have to be okay that it's going to be a smaller group, right? And the person who's paying for that needs to be okay with that too. But in the long run, it's actually increasing the accessibility of our arts and cultural scene. So I think that's one of the strategies that you can take to really sort of push the contemporary music scene.
The city's brand is pulsating, it's ever changing, it's hard to put your arms around it. It also has to be authentic. So in Memphis or Austin, Nashville, it's believable. Our research shows, coast to coast, we're just not seen as a believable, authentic music scene. That's not to slap anyone in the face, it's just the reality of the perception. It's because sports has been our calling card. We're slowly food, culture. I think the quickest and the most efficient way to do that is through our residents. Any good brand, whoever has adopted your product or service first, should be your best brand advocate. And I think we as a community need to embrace our music scene, ground up, and not be afraid socially and otherwise to tout about it and talk about it. We're humble here in the Midwest. We're too humble, if you ask me. And so that's an area for improvement. Right now, there's a refinement to our music scene. You know, we've got, I have to be careful when I say this, the American Pianist Association, which is here, pianist.
This helped, yeah.
Drum Corps International, Music for All, Percussive Arts Society. There's a refinement that we do have talented musicians and cultured people coming through, but how do we ground up make bigger impact? And I think that's through our residents.
Well, let's talk about brand for a second. I mean, do you think that, just to focus in on Indianapolis for a moment, do you feel like Indianapolis, maybe you're not the right person to ask this question, do you feel like Indianapolis has a cohesive brand story that it's telling to its citizens and to people outside the city, not just in the seat that you're sitting in, but sort of across the board?
Yes and no. I would say that we still struggle as a community, and again, we look at the science of our brand every day. Major media, how is Indianapolis being portrayed, what the weather's doing, how our sports are playing, what laws are being signed. It's just constantly ebbing and flowing. And I would say, you know, scale 1 to 10, 10 being like a San Francisco brand or New York brand. Indy's at like a 3. We've made progress. We're no longer Naptown, Indianapolis. We're clean, safe, walkable sports. But that's like steering the Titanic. You can't do it overnight. And so we're trying, but there's a lot of room for improvement.
Joanna, I'd like to go back to something you were talking about and dive in on talent attraction for a second. How much is that specific idea coming up in some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's an answer either way. So we always ask the question, right? Does the culture bring the talent, or does the talent bring the culture, right? And I don't think we know at this point. Obviously, with a lot of work recently argues that the culture brings the talent. So with cultural amenities, with cultural programming, et cetera, we're going to see more and more people. We're going to see talented individuals with human capital move to cities. And so, you know, with the Amazon HQ2 that, you know, every city is trying to get, that's what they're trying to do, right? But I don't actually think there's an answer to that question as of now. I mean, there are still places across the country that, you know, jobs do bring talent, and we see the old model of economic development work really well, right? Starting with the firm, starting with the industry, bringing the talent into a place. So that still works too. So I think that, you know, there's not a real black and white answer to that right now.
Yeah, real talk. I appreciate that. Well, let's kind of talk a little bit about a music strategy and how a plan or a strategic approach for your cities could actually influence music tourism and economic development through music. And this may speak back to kind of pain points or challenges as you see them, but if there was a document that was sort of guiding the next 5 to 10 years, what types of things need to be talked about or explored in that to have impact for each of your worlds in this space?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we're actually in the middle of that. We're doing an update to our cultural district. And to be honest, the cultural district is a great model for the state of Indiana, but it's a little problematic and a little unjust in the sense that it was like a UFO that landed on the community. And so I'm trying to make kind of lemonade out of lemons 10 years into having this cultural district. And so what we're looking at is nighttime mayor or nighttime commission, possibly out of that strategic plan. We're also updating our unified development ordinance. So we're getting kind of out of our built environment, we're not getting the strategies that we need. And so one of the things that we're looking at is doing arts waivers, which would be similar to like green building infrastructure. So you could increase density if you're a developer by 5 to 10 units, if 51% of the square feet of retail that we mandate in our downtown core is devoted to either an arts and culture or music venue. So that's like one strategy we're looking at to include in our UDO. There's a variety of just different kinds of, because what ends up happening is there's a division now between like top-down cultural districts and then what is now the trendy like naturally occurring cultural districts that happen in places. Is what happens when you have a cultural district that actually is just entertainment and it's just bar and life, or bar and kind of drinking culture, which Bloomington kind of has a stigma for being Indiana University and Kirkwood Avenue. So we're going through those kinds of tensions in the community and looking at a variety of different strategies in which ensures long-term sustainable development for arts and culture, rather than kind of a top-down, kind of bureaucratic kind of approach to saying like, oh, we can just check the box and file this plan away, and nobody can look at it, and then we'll spend $50,000 5 years later on another plan, and then there'll be no action items out of that. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So we're in the middle of a strategic plan.
No thoughts on regulation or a strategy that would positively influence?
Lots of thoughts. I mean, I gotta be honest, I was very anxious coming here today. It's because I'm the least hip person that's ever walked through the doors here. And there's this level of business community and the arts and cultural community, of which, you know, so we're the tourism agency, the Convention and Visitor Bureau. We survive on visitor tax. Our job is to represent Indianapolis outside of Indianapolis. We are very mainstream in that approach, and it's been successful. We've grown tourism exponentially. However, in preparing for today and looking about how we are actively promoting kind of the grit and the local artists and what comes through the doors here, and otherwise we're doing an okay job. And it's because there's this level of being scared to fail or put something out in the public domain that will get beat up. Treese is a hip hop festival that we, the Suits, Visit Indy went, we hired a local photographer, we captured that, the Fountain Square Music Festival. And when we post that, and we are, both of those videos, we'll have a little angst because it is a little gritty for corporate, taxpayer-funded promotional team like Visit Indy. But that's what we need to do a better job of. And so I think part of that strategy is the business community not being afraid of learning and coming into spaces and attending and seeing and believing so they can become advocates, because it can be intimidating.
Yeah. Well, and when I go to another city, if I want to go hang out in Nashville, I'm not going because of the TV show or Opryland. I'm going because I just sort of got this vibe that it's become kind of a cool place to hang out and eat and drink and walk around. And if we're putting out things like those festivals, I feel like those are the sorts of things that will attract different, more, I don't know, but they'll attract folks in a different way because it's more real stuff. When I go on vacation, I don't go because of the city's brand. I go because of sort of just an approachability and because they have nice parks, or because I want to walk around and go to cool restaurants. It's not necessarily anything overarching. And I think we have a lot of that to offer, and we just have to figure out how to
package it. Yeah.
Yep.
And just out of curiosity, is 100% of the hotel occupancy tax here in Indianapolis funding the Visit Indy's work, or does it split? Does it go to multiple bodies?
It's split, but
okay.
It's fair to say that a certain percentage from hotel tax, rent-a-car, ticket tax, food and beverage gets funneled through the city and reinvestment back to Visit Indy. We have a $14 million operating budget to sell the city outside of the city. Point of comparison, Chicago has $28 million. I think Memphis is around 18 to 19 million.
I was going to say, we're not far from.
Yeah. It's how you get conventions, major events, hang your hat on sports, while also marketing the grit and the authenticity. And that's where Do 317 in particular has been very helpful in uncovering that for us, so we can push that out and help showcase arts and culture.
So to that point, I want to make sure we definitely leave plenty of time for questions, but I think that one of the struggles that I've had is just in figuring out, and this has been a topic that's come up a couple of times today, figuring out how to effectively tell these stories to the people that need to hear them, whether that is someone who is going to give you money for something, or varying constituents in the work, right? So some of those people are going to want to see metrics. They're going to want you measuring things. They're going to see that, and others are going to want the sort of people-centric stories that come out of the work. But I'd love for us to just talk a little bit, if any of you have sort of experienced or been a part of a way of measurement and storytelling around this that's been really effective. I would love to hear that. But otherwise, how can we be better about telling this story in a way that makes it very clear that music is driving economic development and tourism in our communities?
Yeah, I think we need to be better code translators and be able to switch code, because I think we tend to go to the economic impact, right? And we tend to throw numbers at people, and it's like, oh, 7-to-1 investment, return on investment. It's like, that doesn't always work, right? And I think one of the things that was brought up was this idea of like all ages venues, right? And what we need to do is talking about everyday futures for our younger individuals, right? They need to be able to see themselves growing older in this community, especially Indiana or Indianapolis or Bloomington, at multiple phases of their life to stick around. And if they're not part of that process, right? We all have seen that Kevin Costner movie, Build It, They Will Come. That is false. People come because they recognize themselves in what you have built. And so I think we need to be better storytellers of that and talking about the impact that the music community has, both in Indianapolis and in this great state, right? Like Indiana, or Hoosiers, which is, I grew up in Kentucky, it's hard for me to say Hoosier, right? We love to hate ourselves. I think Indiana can be excellent. And I think if we can just make that turning point, we can find that story that helps our legislators, that helps our communities, that help our citizens see themselves in what we are building. And I think that's really important. Like the state almost passed a cultural district funding bill, which would have been really great for Indiana, which would have captured sales and payroll tax across 13 cultural districts in the state and kicked that funding back to the city for their own operational support for the arts, which we don't really. My budget's like $80,000. It's not a lot for a full-time city staffer. In Public Works is $32 million in Bloomington, right? So thinking about how do we kind of tell those stories and educate those individuals on both sides of the party, both sides of the aisle, so to speak, is really, really important. And it's beyond just economic impact. It's the quality of life stuff. It's the schools, it's the parks, it's the trail systems. It's the nightlife, it's the bars, it's the craft brews, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to second what Shawn says. I mean, there are so many economic impact studies. I've written a lot of them too. And honestly, maybe 5 people have read what I've written. So they just, at a certain level, they don't do what's necessary. And so at this point, I really think that what Shawn is talking about, it's engagement that really is what convinces and what persuades and what argues that's what's effective. I mean, if you see your kids, for example, do something related to music in your own community and they love it and they come home and they say, Mom, Dad, I just want to do that for the rest of my life, you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm going to let you, you know what I mean? Like that's what really makes a difference and that's what's going to persuade somebody. And while the numbers are enticing, first of all, there's so many things wrong with those numbers a lot of the time. And second of all, on a policymaker's agenda, it's the last thing he or she is interested in is arts and culture. And so maybe, the return on investment, a really big number is going to make that person just look at that number a little longer, but it's really rare that person will actually do something because they see a number. So I totally second what Shawn says.
Everything we do is for the story. I mean, sure, I have to report metrics to some folks, and if there's 5 people at the concert, maybe we have to rethink it. But ultimately, the fact that everyone in Irvington knows when the ISO comes to Ellenberger Park, that's their night to put some wine in their sippy cup, I don't see it, and go out and hang out with their neighbors and watch the ISO under the trees, that means way more than being able to say there were 5,000 people there and that was worth $30,000. And we have those stories all over the city. I mean, not just in parks, but where this activity creates sort of gathering points that build community that I think then it takes longer, but becomes that sort of sense of community development and then economic development because people want to live here and they want to come to these neighborhoods and be a part of that. They want to go to Ellenberger with their neighbors and drink wine out of sippy cups and watch the ISO. I mean, that means something to people.
Yeah, I think organically it'll continue to bubble up and be believable. What strikes me about live music in particular is that in marketing, you look to evoke a positive connection with someone, and we've all been to a show in which you can't stop talking about it. And for those to happen in Indianapolis, we'll build lifelong Indy fans, right? So you're here and you have that epic show, no matter how big the theater is, that's going to endear you to Indy, right? So I don't know how you translate and evoke that emotion into dollars to say, hey, Lily, that's why you should support this really cool music initiative. But that's just, I keep coming back to evoking a positive emotion when you see a live show. But then two, and I firmly believe it, in 4 years from now, we'll look back at the $25 million that Lily will invest in our community for arts and culture, and we'll see the needle move, and it will give undertold stories a platform to be told and assigned metrics to then take off. So I'm very hopefully optimistic about that.
We've got about 10 more minutes, a little bit less left, and I wanted to make sure that we had time to open to questions. So do we have one right here? We got a microphone coming for you.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm with Girls Rock Indianapolis. My question is, so Girls Rock Indy, we put on a summer camp for female identifying, gender nonconforming youths, and trans individuals. So my question is, how can we make a more diverse playing field, a more diverse performances in our parks? Because we have a hard time telling young people that they can be anything they want to be, but then they never see it. So I really am looking, Linda specifically, to see how we can make more diverse performances for our young people who play in the parks that want to be like those people that, you know, they have a hard time seeing.
Well, we have one guy, for those of you who know George Ben, he's amazing, very passionate, but we have one guy who coordinates all of this. So I think it's just a matter of making the connection between him and the right folks, and we can, you know, add different or new groups to our lineup. I think that'd be awesome.
Got one way in the back. We've got a microphone coming to you.
First, a shout out to my colleague Chris Gall on the panel. Hey, Chris. So the roots of hip hop, the roots of rock and roll, they were all about rebellion. What are we doing to allow our local younger musicians and artists, what are we afraid of? So what about that whole issue of rebellion that takes on the issues, the current issues of the day?
It's a great question.
Well, so there's a couple different strategies that question provokes. One of the things that I've been struggling with being in this position, right, is, you know, we live in an age of post-Ghost Ship, right, and post-Charlottesville. And that is totally changing the way public safety is being done from a city perspective. So making sure that we have allies that are in city government pushing back, saying, no, hold up. You mean to tell me you're going to make this venue invest in $50,000 in a sprinkler system when their operating budget is 20 grand? No. Like, right? So what are the ways in which our cities can also, like, protect and provide public safety, right? Or thinking about, you know, one of the things that I battle with Homeland Security on this all the time. I manage all the street festivals in Bloomington as well, is this New Jersey barrier protocol that they're going through, right? And so this idea of, if we're going to take away these public spaces through public safety demands, how are we encouraging that, like, fear doesn't overcome our community? And so that, like, in terms of rebellion, that's not answering your question specifically about, like, you know, Elvis Presley and, you know, all those folks kind of, you know, rebelling. But I think there can be a way in which people in suits can be very avant-garde and rebel within the system. And I think that's what we need right now more so than anything, so we can provide that platform for people to rebel against us.
And I think we also have to be careful. So I mean, social support systems and support systems in general for our younger artists are incredibly important, or maybe lack of regulation. So one of the studies that I just did that was sort of one of the more interesting things I've done recently is looking at what the effect of the Affordable Care Act was on artists, and particularly young artists. So whether or not more artists gained access to health care after Obamacare. And sure enough, like, the rates of health insurance among artists really went up disproportionately compared to other occupations among artists when Obamacare came in. And it just really spoke to me, thinking that when we support our artists, then we see them do better, right? When we provide less regulation so that they can actually, you know, do their craft, then we see our artists' communities flourish. So I think probably, I would say support systems and lack of regulation might really sort of help engender rebellion. So.
think we've got time for one more question. Back corner. Microphone's on its way.
Hello, great information. My name is James Dishram. I work with Stop Beefing Radio, local internet radio station here that services the Midwest and Southwest, or Southeast. And I wanted to ask you all, what is the role or what are the conversations around the platforms that help these artists grow? Because a lot of times, I mean, there's radio stations, magazines, websites, all types of different platforms, and how do they receive support from the local community such as Lily and those types of outlets so that we can help put the artist on a different pedestal through these platforms?
I think I'm understanding your question that we have this density of local artists. How do they gain access to mainstream media to raise their profile?
More, how do the platforms gain access to community support, businesses, sponsorships, those types of things, so that they can then help the artist grow through their platform, essentially? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wonder if it's not about sort of more holistic industry education, sort of not just thinking about artist development when we think about industry education, but thinking about how we can create supports that actually come in to those burgeoning infrastructure pieces, which I think is what you're talking about. So thinking about radio, thinking about all the media and the different ways that, you know, those artists can gain exposure and coverage. Those things don't, you know, just exist all by themselves or with no funding. But I think that there's a place for some of these education pieces where we have maybe a marketing workshop for artists. We need to also create some of those pieces that give tools to those types of folks who are ready to start that blog or start that indie magazine, and how, you know, give them sort of more knowledge and more tools on how to support that. Because really you're running a small business in the same way that every artist is running their own small business. But there's a unique set of knowledge and set of tools that you need, I think, to do that. So that's, you know, my thing would just be, let's think more holistically as we look at kind of music industry education. Anybody else? Ben? Well, thank y'all so much. Thanks to the panel. Give them one more round of applause.